So welcome everyone to the next session in our convergence. And this session concerns the idea and practice of degrowth and how it applies to next system and next system thinking and next system practice as we are starting to, as it's starting to emerge and take shape. So welcome and thanks to the organizers. Thanks to all of you for joining. And my name's Matthew Burke. I am a research faculty at the University of Vermont in the Community Development and Applied Economics Department, and also with a program called Leadership for the Ecozoic, or L4E. And L4E serves as a research and academic community organized around graduate education. Thanks for getting the slides up. L4E is organized around graduate education, based both at University of Vermont and at McGill University. And we're committed to this idea of advancing a shift towards mutually enhancing human-earth relationships among humans and the rest of nature. In focusing on degrowth here, we want to acknowledge that the pursuit of, this is relating to what John Erickson was just speaking to, the pursuit of unending economic growth really undermines the possibility for these mutual relations and the collective conditions for living well. So we want to suggest that degrowth offers a vision and a practice for achieving well-being of people and planet without growth. And in this way, degrowth is essential to the next system. And that's what we want to present here in our open discussion. So allow me to briefly introduce my colleagues and co-organizers for the session. We have Matias Pacareza Sevilla joining and Chris McElroy, both graduate students, PhD students at the University of Vermont with Leadership for the Ecozoic. Myself, Liza Macombore, I think Dakota may be joining perhaps a bit later, and Liza and Dakota are also PhD students in L4E. And then finally, Julie Starr, who's our program director at UVM for L4E. And all of us collectively will be helping to facilitate this session. So it's offered, the session is organized and offered as an open discussion. Matthias and Chris are going to provide a few opening comments, and then we'll turn to a discussion and attempt to open space for as many questions as possible in the time available. I and others joining me here will be keeping an eye on the chat as well as on the Q&A, both of which are accessible at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And feel free to make use of the chat and the Q&A throughout. We can't promise we'll get to everything. We'll get to as much as we can. And one thing we wanted to start with, by way of using the chat, is to invite people, when you think or have come across the word degrowth, if you would want to put in one word, or maybe a short phrase, but maybe one word into the chat so that we can all share a little bit what comes to mind for you with the term degrowth. What does it inspire? What kind of thought? What kind of practice? Go ahead and pop those into the chat. We have about 28 participants here, so hopefully we'll get a little bit of something from everyone. And then we'll use that as an opportunity to perhaps come back to some of these points as we get going further. So without any other introduction, I will hand it over to Matthias and Chris, and thank you again.
Thank you. I see all the words rolling in. That's very exciting to see. And yeah, we wanted to just give a brief introduction, especially for people that haven't maybe heard of degrowth before or have heard of it only briefly, how we at least think of degrowth. First of all, I'll just say it's a thing that people think about in many different ways. So this is just a definition of like how we're approaching this term and coming into this discussion. So fundamentally, we see degrowth as an economy shaped for people and the planet and all of the more than humans living on the planet. It would involve an economy with less material and energy use, less destructive and socially unnecessary production, less inequality, inequity, less unemployment, and one of the ways of getting to less unemployment is things like less hours of work per week. So people working shorter weeks, so that more people are sharing the work between them. And the goal would be to do all of this to have more well-being, more non-market goods and services, like goods and services provisioned and provided by the community or the government, more democratic production, and more of a focus on the collective and building community. And then we also wanted to mention some of the things that people often think of when they hear degrowth, that it sounds like a recession or austerity, and that's very much not what it is. It's an intentional scaling back of some parts of production that seem less beneficial or necessary. And a recession is just this across the board decline of the economy, which often affects the things that seem the most socially necessary first. So it's very different from those ideas. It's not a step backwards to some earlier time, some earlier economic system, and similarly, it's not anti-progress, and it's not just made to be a reduction in quality of life. Again, this is made to be deliberately increasing people's well-being by removing the things that our current economic system, spends a lot of time and resources producing, that aren't actually maybe benefiting people. Like an easy example would be things like advertisements that are not actually helping people live happier lives. And many people end up actually very annoyed by advertisements, and we can take that out, reducing economic activity while actually improving people's quality of life. And then finally, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's not singular. There's not one degrowth. It wouldn't be a top-down enforcement of degrowth across the entire world. And it would mean very different things in different locations. And I'll pass it to Matthias for more thoughts.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. Like to see your faces, but well, I guess like in this online era, like it's not possible to do it. So I just wanted to connect like why degrowth for envisioning a next system. And well, I had like a couple of thoughts about this that I wanted to systematically talk about. That is why, because like degrowth is a radical change. With this, I mean that is coming, trying to solve the problems from the roots, and which aligns with the values of the next system. It's actually like the rejection of capitalism, of the very mechanisms that underpins capitalisms and actually organize nowadays our social ecological relationships. There is also like from focus on efficiency and on technological solutions for the public crisis that we are living today, to focus on like sufficiency, in which like the most important is meeting needs and improving well-being of both humans and non-humans. Also like from like society organized through production and consumption for economic growth, for like a democratic organization of towards creating well-being, again, for both humans and non-humans. That's when we talk about like the social ecological kind of values that degrowth stands for as the main kind of values that we want to pursue. And also like it's also like framing away from the maximization of individual gains, like this homo economicus, from the self-interest rationale to like a collective improvement where we see ourselves in connection, right? And also like from a vision of scarcity that actually drives like competition in this capitalist market, to a vision of abundance when we see like entities are taken from the non-human nature, not as commodities, but as a gift that we can interchange and live in relationship with. And also like from private property as a way to accumulate, like seeing wealth as having enough to accumulate, to and also like private property as like the focus on preservation, conservation, to a focus on common property, that is wealth is understood as having enough to share, and also a conviviality that allow us to decide collectively in the relation we want to have with the beyond human world and ourselves. Obviously, it's important to notice that degrowth is not like outside of like critiques and also some challenges, that has been like criticized for its Eurocentrism, right? That is kind of appeal more to the middle European class. And also it's been like kind of criticizing challenges for the overrepresentation of other like frameworks of discourses that are like out there that could be as important as degrowth, but since it's trying to like kind of frame like a real and comprehensive like kind of discourse, it could like sometimes underrepresent them or marginalize them, or like kind of, yeah, so not taking them into consideration. And also like there is an issue about the south-north divide, and also like the idea of what are going to be like the short-term impacts on a really entangled like global economy. And yeah, I'm just giving like a brief kind of introduction to this concept. We can discuss them afterwards all together. And also like in terms of governance, like sometimes degrowth advocate for like a more top-down governance, where the state is the main figure that is steering like socio-ecological relation in this transition, versus like some bottom-up approaches that are coming from the real territories and places, or territories of life, as we will see in the next discussion. Also, like about the framing, some people I would say that degrowth is too academic, too based in academia, and is not having real impacts in what we would call like the real world, or like it's too much activism, right? Like that people would say that degrowth has not a scientific base. And others have said that it's overly optimistic, in the sense that it requires more systematic change than the ones that are like considered in the literature. Another like really like a big point of discussion is around population. If we take into consideration that the PIT approach, that the environmental, the non-human world damage happens because of three factors of population, affluence, and technology, like sometimes the growth has been like kind of criticized for not addressing the issue of population growth. So I will hand over now to Chris. And yeah, thank you so much. I'm looking forward for the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matthias. Um, so yeah, this is now the main part of our thing. We have another like 45 minutes or so, and we're hoping to hear from all of you. I believe the way that we can interact is that you can either post things in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can read them out. Or if you raise your hand, I think we should be able to unmute you. I'm not sure that I have that power, but hopefully somebody else does.
Yeah, I
And
think we can
yeah,
do that.
okay, awesome. So if people want to think about, whatever questions you have, whatever is coming to mind, and then we can use that as sort of a launching point for discussion. We're hoping that the three of us are not the only ones talking, and we can have more of a community talking about and interfacing with these ideas. We're excited to hear from all of you. Yeah, Liza.
Chris, there are questions in the chat if there's no one who's going to raise their hand. I think Julie's manning those.
Yeah, I don't think I had caught them. I saw there's one question of what if you could have no unemployment?
Yes, that one.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's an exciting question. I think that's like definitely central to a lot of the discussions I see in degrowth. And like some of the questions that I've thought about a lot is like, what does it mean to be employed? Like what does it mean to have a system where uh, the way that you get your the resources that you need to survive, the goods and services you need to survive, comes from the work that you do. Like, if you have, like we mentioned, more public provisioning of goods and services, maybe the idea of being employed ceases to even be a very sensical definition. So yeah, that's something that I've thought about a bit. I'm curious what other people's thoughts are, though. And that includes that we can officially unmute the attendees. So if you raise your hand, we're happy to hear from you.
And I'm noticing one other question in the chat for which is, where do you see glimpses of the long-term degrowth vision in the world today?
Chris, do you want to take that one, or Matthias?
No, please go ahead. I was just giving space for people to step in, and please feel free to just like give your comments or what you think about it. And yeah, we'd like this to be like a safe space for everybody.
Yeah, Jeff, I wonder if you want to speak to that, because I know you have been involved with a lot of degrowth work and activity for quite some time. I guess yeah. Okay. Try it now, Jeff.
Oh, great. I'm glad to be participating as a participant because I'll be on a panel and I'm not really used to the webinar setup. So thanks for kicking things off. Where do I see glimpses? These things are really hard. I like in my in my sort of intellectual work, but really in my personal life as well, to have these beacons on the horizon as I think of them. And there's a couple of things about that. I think if they're on the horizon, you maybe can't see them fully clearly, and that's okay. It's a direction more than anything that's concrete, because we can't be too concrete about something. If I envision a degrowth world, it's pretty far off, and there's so much unpredictability in how we get there. So, but I find it valuable to always have in mind, because it avoids things like relying on things that are part of a non-degrowth world today that might get us in that direction, but really can't, really probably need to be shedded somewhere along the ways. I'll give you kind of a far out answer to that, to my own question, which is, so, and this is in the various fellowships and programs around the world helping people deal with various kinds of addictions. And you have like Weight Watchers things, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, all those things that are dealing with people who want to stop but have a really hard time doing it. And what's I'll be fully confessional here. I've been involved in some of those, and what's kind of magic about those things when they work is you do it in community with other people that are facing those same issues. So you support each other. So there's just a real, almost in any example I know about, a sense of solidarity and doing that together. And you find other ways to deal with challenges and things that come your way that involve using less of the thing you're kind of obsessed or focused on. And the miracle that happens is that you, at some point, find out that your life is actually much, much better. So I think in our consumerist world, there is an analogy to addictions and to messaging that focuses on sort of all kinds of insecurities and ways of seeing oneself in the world that don't have to be that way. It's, these are problems of perception, and the perceptions that are out there, and they can be built with solidarity and community, and point in a much different and much better direction. So I'll throw that out there as well.
Yeah. Well, to your question, Jeff, I would say also like this degrowth economy is always happening like throughout history. I don't see something new on this. Like when we grow up in our families, and here I'm quoting my Josh, Yeah, my advice, like you grow in a care economy, or like if you are privileged enough, for sure. I don't want to like take that for granted, but your parents don't charge you to live in your house. Like they care for you when you're caring for the elders as well, or when you have like your grandparents and you are taking care of them. I see my degrowth when I'm with my dog and I take care for her like without asking anything in return as well. So I see like this care economy happening, and nowadays we can see more like, well, I'm coming from Chile and in Latin America, like we have like this kind of relationship where we like kind of try to help each other beyond like a context of monetary relationship, and more for creating like relationship as the currency of exchange per se. So I see in all of these kind of like, it could like look like little, but I see like in this relationship per se like degrowth happening. And yeah, like, well, nowadays are more initiatives and more people like trying to from the local, and this was one of the discussion that John Erickson was having before, like if this needs to necessarily happen like in different part of the world, from the local, from the grassroots, from places, in like creating like communities of conviviality, of autonomy, like the Zapatista movement, for example, and in Chiapas. And there are like stuff going on happening in eco villages as well. There are like obviously some critiques of that, but I see like degrowth like trying to arise from the bottom up. That is perhaps for me the main concern. And just to speak a little bit about like the unemployment issue, like what came into my mind, I was reading a little bit of MNT now. I need to refresh my memory on that. That is modern monetary theory. It's like unemployment is something that is actually artificially created to like kind of like create this dispute of people for jobs, right? And for them being able to sell the labor in the market and to compete and to being exploited in a market now that is organized to for profits and not organized for producing well-being. So if we can create like, and to Nina's point, there are discussions about this universal basic income as a degrowth policy as well. There are other discussions about like a job guarantee, a public job guarantee, where like people that are able to work and are willing to work, they can actually work in public jobs that are created, or they are focused on creating well-being, but not profit. Yeah, I will stop there.
We've got a lot of questions coming in. Thank you for that. And I'm going to just try to start towards the top. I think, where did it go? I saw one from Nina, a comment that gets to the question of decoupling. So Nina writes, I like the potential of decoupling employment from satisfying well-being needs, as implied by universal basic services, as an improvement perhaps over universal basic income. Would love to hear your thoughts on any of this. So I think the decoupling question is really key to the whole conversation around degrowth. The whole premise of sustainable economic growth and sort of the sustainability paradigm, sustainable development, is really hinges on this notion of decoupling. In other words, somehow separating material and energy throughput from the unending growth in the scale of the economy and economic transactions. There's been no, we don't need to get into that in any great detail, but just to say for the purpose here, there's been no demonstration of, in any meaningful sense, of that possibility of decoupling. In other words, the the relationship between energy use, material use, and economic growth, as measured in GDP, is pretty tight, and it's been very stubborn in terms of trying to detangle those. So, as Nina, I think, is getting at, there's a need to the decoupling that I would say we need to do is decoupling our collective well-being from the need for unending economic growth. How do we meet one another's needs without having to rely on economic growth and the way it's popularly justified by providing jobs for everyone, which of course it's failed to do even by its own terms over the last 50 plus years. So I will stop there on the question of decoupling, but it's a great point.
Yeah, I have more to say about it, but I would love to hear like participants to speak about it and hear their thoughts.
Yeah, Anthony, I saw you talking about the relationship between degrowth and population growth and increased demand, and then also about Greg Coleridge was posting about nonviolence and like sort of the name of degrowth. And yeah, lots of other really interesting questions. If anybody wants to speak more to that, your reactions to that, or also if the people posting want to explain more where you're coming from, what you're thinking about, definitely feel free to raise your hand.
We want to take, so Locke Riley, you had asked about the current circumstance, how may or may not that be distinguished from degrowth, and I saw a response to that further along, and I wonder if either of you would like to speak to that. I guess I need to unmute. Just raise your hand if you'd like me to unmute. Okay. We can keep going. Does anyone want to take that question?
I'm happy to speak to it briefly.
Go ahead.
This is the post about yeah, the administration's changes. I feel like that really gets at some of what we were talking about the difference between austerity and degrowth. And I think some of it comes up in, you know, everyone nominally says that they're acting to try to make the world a better place and to try to increase well-being, but I think it really matters how you go about trying to make that happen. And I see a lot of the changes in the current administration. They are cutting costs. They are reducing economic activity in many ways. Many of those changes are being done with the at least nominal progress, and in the long term, they will increase economic activity. So there's a big difference there in terms of the sort of underlying goals. And then even in the short term, when they're decreasing economic activity, that's not being done with any short-term guarantee of well-being. So the guaranteed jobs, the guaranteed goods and services, the focus on cutting things that are not just non-essential, but that are actively destructive. That's not being done, and in many cases, actually the opposite is being done, where regulations that prohibit environmentally destructive acts are being peeled back or not enforced. And so it leads to a system that is more environmentally destructive and less, pulled to be supporting well-being and supporting the people and non-humans that are affected.
And I appreciated M's point too. I mean, to relate it to what Chris was just saying, the whole intention of this this project that we're seeing now, 2025 project, and that whatever framing has come before it that's being initiated now is explicitly to accelerate growth and accumulation for the wealthiest. It has nothing to do with broad well-being. It has nothing to do with getting away from fossil fuels. It has nothing to do with sharing. So I really don't see any relationship to what we're seeing now to degrowth, only in a very narrow sense of reducing the size of the US federal government, perhaps. But again, that is not being done with an overall attempt to redistribute and make a more sane and rational economic system. It's being done to accelerate the levels of accumulation for the already wealthy. I'm wondering if Anthony, if you want to speak to your question, or if someone wants to take that.
What is the question about, man?
Anthony, do you want to read? Anthony Cook, do you want to read your question? You're welcome to if you like.
You can raise your hand if you want.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is just related to clarifying the relationship between underlying drivers of population growth and the degrowth philosophy and movement. One of the assumptions I think of conventional economics is that growth populations increase the need for more goods and services, demand for those goods and services, and individuals in various forms collectivize to meet the demand of those goods and services, and that is one of the drivers of growth, right? So I was hoping that you could clarify the relationship between the underlying drivers of population growth, asserting that kind of natural demand, and the degrowth movement.
I see that Bill raised their hand, so we can unmute.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to share my thoughts about that, but then you might have some others. From what I've read about degrowth, and some do talk about certainly population, but I think maybe they're cautious of making that a focus directly because, first of all, if you look at the places where there's greater growth in population, where children like in the global South and Africa, places like that, that they're not using up the resources that the North is, where the population is, many of them are decreasing. So that's one thing. So I guess to get at that, some of the things that degrowth I think might help with is if education and well-being is taken care of, then people tend to have less children, and population kind of will either level out, in some cases decreases. So maybe looking at over the long term that it would work out if these policies were also degrowth policies were benefiting the global South as well. So that if to try to put that focus on that would put another maybe pressure on places where a lot of times they may have more children because of various reasons, is not only seeing that they might lose children because of inadequate medical care, but also looking at the familiar, the family wealth that they see associated with it, and cultural change that will happen as people get more educated and get more well-being resources. So that's my thought about that.
Absolutely agreed here. Definitely, population is something that I think people have historically been scared to touch, but I see more and more in literature, in conferences, and in seminars like this, people talking more openly about the idea of population. And I think it's something that, like you said, it is very tied to economic incentives and economic drivers, where like I look at, for example, America in like the 18 and early 1900s, you have a huge incentive to explore the West and sort of take over the whole continent by having children. And like the way to settle your land was to have 10 kids, and then you could have a whole farm worth of workers that are all your children. And so the economy incentivized people to the way to be profitable, the way to be able to exist in that settler colonial landscape was to have as many children as you could. And so people did. And I think you see that over and over again when you give people the incentive to have a lot of children, then they do. And when you give people situations where they feel like they can't afford to have children, which is something that I hear more and more in the US from people in my generation, then people have fewer kids. And so I think like population is very directly tied to those things. And I think if you create an economy where you can have a good life without having 10 kids, my guess would be that most people wouldn't, because that seems like a lot of work. And like you brought up as well with disease and like child mortality. Like if you don't think that 8 of your kids are going to die before they become adults, then you don't need to have 10 kids. So yeah, I think those are, at least to me, what comes to mind.
Yeah, and I also want to highlight the a feminist perspective on this. So like when you're like having a woman who has like more rights, have more decision about what to do with their bodies, as well as this create a other kind of like dynamics that yeah make them like with the agency that they always should have had, like to decide on their bodies. So that's something really nice. I don't know, Em. I'm calling you because I know if you want to speak to that. If not, it's fine. I don't want to like kind of co-opt any kind of vision, but I think it's important to say it here. And yeah, okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, no, finish your end.
No, please. That's all. I just want to hear you.
Well, I mean, you said basically what I was going to say, and what I think Chris was also saying without naming it. It's like not only from the perspective of a woman bearing a child, but a feminist perspective. And I think degrowth and feminism go hand in hand, which is so beautiful about it. And there is a delicate balance that we have to talk about, as you said, because who are we to tell other people not to have children, especially if they're not consuming to the degree that smaller household sizes in the global north are consuming, if not arguably more, as the person who spoke about this earlier said. And at the same time, we do see the correlations, if not a direct correlation, between growth on all sides, whether it's population, economic growth, and or environmental destruction, growth of that destruction. So just thanks for bringing all of this together. And I'm going to share something in the chat here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to just add too to Anthony's question. I think your question for me resonates in the sense that degrowth as a as a community, say, there is some reluctance to really address directly the population question, and there are good reasons for that. The population question is fraught, of course, and it's also especially certain strains, albeit I would say a minority within the environmental movement. There have also been some really nasty expressions around the problems of so-called problems of population. And I find that to be very unfortunate now, because I do think there are important debates and discussions to have around population and population growth that frankly are just, I think, being avoided for a variety of concerns, that sort of historical legacy. But we see it, I think it's not just population, but I also think of it as demographics. Like a lot of communities, societies are aging, for example. And that is often then seen as a need. Well, we need to bring in more working people. We need to bring in more young people. And what that does is that it places a greater value on working people of a certain ability, of a certain age, often of a certain class and a certain race and so on, above others as sort of the productive and therefore valuable individuals within a society, whereas elderly, in this case, in addition to children, but also elderly, are devalued and in some sense forgotten. And we're seeing that repeatedly, in our relationship. So I think it comes back to this sense of care, putting care at the center of what we mean by degrowth, in the sense that elders, in this case of the demographic context, would also be seen as valuable contributors in their own right in the society and cared for accordingly. I wanted to bring in that point as well. And Anthony, thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. And thank you, Bill, also for complimenting and saying, yeah, what we agree on. There are more questions in the chat I've been seeing.
Matthias, you had mentioned earlier modern monetary theory, and PG had written, should next systems
Yeah.
consider and engage modern monetary theory, MMT? And I wonder if you wanted to speak more to that.
Yeah, I want to speak more to that. And well, I'm still like kind of wrapping my mind around modern monetary theory, and it's like kind of possible venues to be applied in different contexts. What for me is like, I mean, if it should be applied on the next system or not, like perhaps yes, but modern monetary theory says nothing about politics, right? It's just like an explanation of how like the macroeconomic and the financial system works in a sense, right? And how the monetary system works. And what I see in my point of view that it needs to be applied. I mean, modern monetary theory, just in brief, is like states that issue that are monetary sovereign. That means that they issue their own currency, they collected taxes in their own currency, they have a floating exchange rate, and also they don't have like a big like kind of a debt denominated in foreign currency. The theory says that these states can actually they are currency issuers, so they won't run out of money. And this is the deficit myth that is being written by Stephanie Kelton. And but so actually, if we want to invest and in well-being, we can do it. States can do it. Monetary sovereign states can do that, right? But the caveat here, like from a degrowth perspective, is like, okay, the limit for MMT is in the literature saying that is kind of it's limited by the risk of inflation. So if we have too much money circulating in the economy, too much demand, and we don't have the productive capacity to produce those goods and services they want to do, like inflation will happen. But there is like one point more and further about that. If we take a degrowth perspective, that is related to that. Actually, like the real constraint is not monetary. The real constraint is the biophysical base that we have in our economy geographies to produce these goods that are like completely tied to the financial and monetary system. And if we go one step back, this goes and calls for like the energy that we have to produce like or to process these raw materials that are part of our goods and services in the economy. So I think for me, it needs to be applied, but also taking in consideration this like kind of degrowth perspective that the economy is based on a biophysical like foundation. And yeah, I can go further on this and saying like, for example, like we need to put this also in kind of perspective with the system that we already have and the system we are planning within the capital system that could be like green growth strategy, right? That is just like pointing out to efficiency, a massive like turn to technology, right, to solve these issues and to decrease like technology will decrease like the impacts that we are having, right? Like this means like a decarbonization, a massive turn to renewable energies and to these green technologies. But these have a lot of caveats as well, because what there is something called the Yevon paradox, that the more like we we increase efficiency, right, the more we consume. So all these like kind of gains that we have, like they are offset like by the increase in consumption. There is also like I mentioned the energy base because it's interesting to see that we are not like we don't have access to the really concentrated and easy to get and cheap to get like fossil fuels anymore. So even like within like a fossil fuel kind of like regime, like we every year we need more energy to extract energy from fossil fuels to produce like the goods and services we need. So when we talk about turning into renewable energy, that would mean like the energy return of investment of energy sources is way lower than fossil fuels. So this will require like a massive like manufacturing of like all these technologies. Manufacture of these old technologies means like exploitation of different territories around the globe, especially in the global south, to get all these materials. To get these materials, you need energy for that. So it's like a whole cycle, a systemic cycle that it's really needed to be understood in order to see why the growth is so pressing nowadays. And when we talk about like increasing like also the extraction of resources, we have seen that there is also like a decrease in ore component of minerals. So you need to extract more ton of minerals to get the same amount of mineral you were able to get in the past. So all this is like kind of piling up to say like limit. There are limit, as John Erickson said before, like there are limits to growth. When is that limit? When are we gonna realize about that limit? I will stop there. Sorry, I got excited.
No, that was great.
Excited.
Thanks, Matthias. And I wanted to invite Greg Coleridge if you want to come off mic too, because you've been sharing some great points and resources as related to monetary theory and the control of money.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hey. Yeah, I do appreciate the conversation and just wanted to throw out for people's consideration the whole issue of the relationship between economic growth / degrowth and money creation. You know, truth of the matter is 95% of all money created in our country, if not most countries, is created by private entities, financial corporations, as debt, not as an asset, but as debt. And when you have something that's created as debt, the only way out of that debt is oftentimes, whether it's a person, whether it's a company, whether it's a country, is to go into more debt. And I mean, you can try to grow your way out of it, which means you got to plunder people or the planet to do that, or you got to go into more debt, which is sort of akin to trying to drink yourself sober. Last time I checked, that doesn't work real well. So, you know, unless we get at trying to prevent the ability of banking financial corporations to, you know, they've got the power to create not only the money, but the decision on where the money is loaned. We're never going to get at this, I don't think. So I think a really important interconnection between economic justice and ecological justice has to do with sort of the power to get our hands literally on the spigot of money creation and deciding who creates it, where it goes, and the like. And so the Alliance for Just Money is such an organization that has something called Just Money and has developed their plan called the American Monetary Reform Act that's based on something called the NEED Act that was introduced by Dennis Kucinich about a decade ago in Congress when he still was in Congress. That was the only effort, maybe in the history. Well, it goes back actually during the 1930s under FDR, that administration. There was a plan for monetary reform then. Instead of going into debt to create the policies and programs of the Great Depression, a number of economists felt the way to deal with social justice, economic justice at that time was to create money as an asset. So anyway, AMRA, the American Monetary Reform Act, is the latest manifestation of that plan that goes back to the 1930s and more recently as the NEED Act of Dennis Kucinich. So I put the link to a PDF in the chat of the AMRA that invite people to check it out and see if it is worthwhile sort of considering as a piece of what needs to be done.
Yeah, very much agreed. Thank you, Greg. That was a
Thank you, Greg.
fantastic point to pull in. And I think that that's a crucial question when talking about these things, that as Matthias was getting at, like, it's not only a question of like having governments spend more money, and looking at sovereign money creation, but also looking at where all of the money creation that exists today is happening, and whether any of that has a basis in the biophysical world, whether any of that has something that you can actually spend on that money in a way that's sustainable. To that point, I wanted to pull in two questions that I thought were really interesting. One was Art's question: does the path to degrowth lie in developing new survival strategies in the context of a collapsing or at least receding consumer capitalism? And if not, would it require a highly centralized transition? I see that as one of the core tensions in a lot of degrowth literature. And then Don was similarly asking, can we briefly share the implications of crypto in degrowth, given the energy required to mine this? Is it a legitimate form of exchange? And I would say, similar to what we were just saying, my initial thought is like, it's legitimate as much as any other monetary form, but it still, it's questionable as much as any other monetary form that's created as debt. Does this have any basis in the real world? When you go to spend that money, do you have a guarantee that there's something to be spent on? But yeah, I wanted to ask Art or Don or anyone else if they wanted to speak more to those questions. I think they're really provocative. So I just wanted to turn us towards those. Yeah, Don.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious. I mean, the question's very bare. I personally, I feel that the amount of energy that is required to build crypto systems is creating a problem for energy development in general terms, because we're having to continue to rely on fossil fuels to build some of these, and then there's the construction implications, and then just all of the it almost seems like they're building the crypto economy in order to just keep building something for the sake of building something. Like, that's the impression that I get. I don't know if it's true, because I honestly I don't necessarily understand crypto, and so that's why I just thought that if you could provide some insight into that, maybe I could understand it better.
Yeah, thank you, Don. Time is flying, so we have only 5 minutes left. So if we can take one more question, if somebody wants to like raise their hands, and yeah, and then we will turn over to like, yeah, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just want to briefly speak to the money question as well, regardless of the source or the mechanisms by which the money system is created. Yeah, I have deep skepticism around crypto as well as AI, and due to it's obliviating any sort of efficiency gains that have been derived. But I think, coming back to Matthias, your point around really understanding the relationship between money and the biophysical reality. And someone had shared a link to a paper from a colleague of ours, Joe Ament, who's writing a bit about this relationship. And then also to Greg's point that money really is about power in the end, or at its root. Like, and if we don't have some sort of way of getting control over our monetary system, over our money system, be that at a community level or otherwise, then we are really going to continue to be at the mercy of those who do have that control. So I'll just stop there.
Should we turn over to Liza, Matt? Because we have only 3 minutes left, so I don't think we'll have time for another question.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to everyone for being in this session and just the incredible engagement. So I'm meant to sort of synthesize this session briefly and summarize maybe key highlights. I wanted to just go back to where we started with people popping in what the word degrowth inspires, or what it makes them think of. And there were words such as reconnect, belonging, stopping the insanity, which I thought was also quite hilarious, but it totally resonated with me. Reconnect, and then some contradictions where utopia, and I think this is coming from all the discussions that we had later on around, how degrowth contends with population growth, and sort of maybe some of the things that were coming for me in terms of how degrowth has got some roots in sort of feminist economics, and maybe decoloniality as well, and so on, and how it's sort of amplifying some of those perspectives as well. There was also a word around what about those who are unemployed, which sparked a lot of discussion here. And I think it's connected to the financial power, the issues that we were speaking about just now, in terms of the economy and who's running it, power. We also got into a little bit about trade and what's happening currently within the administration. How is that degrowth or not degrowth? And I think there was a great discussion here. So I wanted to end and say, for me, this session really brought up a lot of thoughts around how can we shape the economy for people and planet, which is exactly where we started, where degrowth was presented as a perspective that can inform how we can shape the economy for people and planet, and I think speaks to the next system that we are going to be gathering and talking about here. So thank you, everybody, and thanks to all the resources, thanks to Bill, everyone who contributed, and looking forward to connecting with the resources. So watch out for the resources that were put in the chat. Thank you.